15 years of loyalty, gone in a single moment. I gave my life to that company, worked nights, weekends, sacrificed everything. And how did they thank me? By firing me and handing my job to the CEO's brother. This is my story. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. 15 years of my life gone in a single sentence. My name is Gloria, and today I want to share the story of how my world crumbled. How the company I gave everything to betrayed me in the cruelest way. I still remember that Monday morning. I was sitting at my desk sipping lukewarm coffee when my manager walked in with a strange look on his face. He asked me to step into the conference room. At first, I thought maybe I was getting recognized for my years of service. After all, I had worked weekends, holidays, and even stayed late when no one else would. I gave my heart to this job. But the words that came out of his mouth, they shattered me. Gloria, your position has been terminated. We're letting you go. My ears rang. My heart pounded. I thought maybe I misheard him. Terminated? After 15 years of loyalty? 15 years of carrying this company through deadlines, angry clients, and endless hours of hard work. 15 years of giving them more than I ever gave myself. And just like that, I was disposable. I whispered the only word I could manage. Why? He couldn't even look at me. He shuffled the papers in his hands, sighed, and said, "The CEO made the decision. He wants his younger brother to step into this role." I froze. His brother. The CEO's brother, who had no experience? Who had never worked a single day in this company? He was being handed my job like it was some kind of birthday gift. I sat there in silence, my chest burning with anger and humiliation. Everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed was being brushed aside for nepotism. I walked out of that office with my box of belongings, my framed family photo, the mug my daughter had given me, the little sticky notes I had collected over the years. My coworkers looked at me with wide eyes, but no one dared to say anything. Some lowered their heads, too afraid to show sympathy in case they were next. That silence was louder than any words. When I stepped outside, the tears came. Not just from sadness but from betrayal. I had been loyal. I had been dedicated. And none of it mattered. To them, I was just another name they could erase. The following weeks were some of the darkest days of my life. I woke up every morning with no purpose. I replayed every memory, staying late while my family ate dinner without me, missing birthdays, ignoring my health, all for a company that saw me as replaceable. At night, I would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, my mind filled with one question. Was I really worth nothing? Friends tried to comfort me. Gloria, you'll find another job. But they didn't understand. This wasn't just about money. This was about 15 years of my identity being stripped away in a single conversation. I felt humiliated, broken, and small. One morning, after weeks of crying and drowning in self-pity, something inside me snapped. I thought to myself, why am I wasting tears on people who never cared about me? That day, I turned on my laptop and started looking. Not for another job like the one I lost, but for something new, something that would put me back in control of my own life. I started freelancing, helping small businesses with the skills I had mastered over the years. At first, the pay was small, barely enough to cover the basics. But the freedom, the independence, the ability to choose who I worked with, it felt like a breath of fresh air. Slowly, I began to rebuild my confidence. I realized something important. My value was never tied to a company. My worth was mine to define. I invested in myself. I took online courses, learned new tools, and upgraded my skills. Soon, I wasn't just freelancing for survival, I was building something bigger. One of my projects grew into a steady stream of work, and then into a full-fledged business. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in fear of being replaced. I was creating my own path. The more I worked, the stronger I felt. I even started mentoring young women who were struggling in their careers. I told them what I had learned the hard way. Never give your entire life to a company that would replace you in a heartbeat. Build something that no one can take away from you. 6 months later, life surprised me in the most ironic way. I was sitting in a cafe, laptop open, working on a big project, when I heard a familiar voice. It was my old manager. He looked shocked to see me. He sat down and said, "Gloria, how are you doing?" I smiled and replied, "Better than ever." He hesitated before admitting the truth. The CEO's brother had failed miserably. Clients had left, projects had collapsed, and the company was struggling. Then he looked at me and said the words that almost made me laugh. "They regret letting you go." For the first time, I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel bitterness. I felt power. I leaned back, took a sip of my coffee, and said calmly, "It's too late. I've built something of my own now." Walking out of that cafe, I realized something I want you to remember. Sometimes being fired isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of a better one. If you've ever felt betrayed, discarded, or replaced, hear this. Sometimes life pushes you out of places where you no longer belong so you can rise higher than you ever imagined. I lost 15 years to a company that didn't value me, but in losing that, I found myself. And today I can finally say it proudly. I am Gloria. I was fired, I was broken, but I rose again. And I am stronger than ever. I asked the only question I could manage. Why? The manager avoided my eyes, shuffled his papers, and finally admitted. The CEO decided to bring in someone else, his younger brother. I froze. His brother. A man with no experience? A man who never worked a single day in this company? He was being handed my job like a birthday gift. I couldn't believe it. I had trained dozens of employees. I knew every corner of the system, every client's name by heart. And yet, I was tossed aside not because of performance but because of connections. That was the moment it hit me. In their eyes, I was not Gloria, the loyal worker. I was just replaceable. I sat there in silence, my stomach turning, my throat tight. 15 years of sacrifice meant nothing. The late nights, the canceled vacations, the weekends I stayed at the office instead of being with my family. It all vanished with a single decision made behind closed doors. No warning. No gratitude. No second thought. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them how unfair this was. But the words wouldn't come. My manager just sat there with that blank expression like he had already moved on. To him, this was routine. To me, it was devastation. I packed up my things in a daze. My framed family photo, the mug that said "World's Best Mom." The stack of notebooks filled with years of ideas and plans. I placed them gently into a box as my coworkers looked on in silence. No one said anything, but I could see the fear in their eyes. If it could happen to me, the most loyal employee, it could happen to anyone. Walking out of that building for the last time felt like walking out of a part of myself. The air was heavy, my legs were weak, and the tears I had been holding back finally spilled over. People on the street probably thought I was just another woman having a bad day, but to me it was so much more. I had lost not just a job, but an identity I had built over 15 long years. The days that followed were some of the darkest I've ever lived. Every morning, I woke up expecting to get dressed and head to work. But there was no office waiting for me. Just silence. I felt useless, like my entire existence had been erased. I avoided friends and family, too ashamed to admit that after all my dedication, I had been replaced by someone who hadn't even earned it. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision I had ever made. Should I have stood up for myself more? Should I have looked for other opportunities sooner? Why did I give so much of my life to a place that didn't deserve me? Those questions haunted me, but the answers never came. For weeks, I lived like a ghost. My phone stayed silent. My email inbox, once overflowing with tasks and deadlines, now sat empty. I had gone from being someone people depended on to someone forgotten in an instant. And then one morning, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My eyes were swollen from crying, my shoulders slumped with defeat. That's when something inside me shifted. I thought, why am I destroying myself over people who never truly valued me? They had moved on without hesitation. Why couldn't I? So I opened my laptop and started searching. Not for another corporate job. Not for another place where I could be used and discarded. I searched for ways to take control of my own future. I started small, offering freelance services using the skills I had mastered over the years. At first, the pay was almost nothing. But I wasn't just chasing money anymore. I was chasing freedom. Every project I completed reminded me that my skills were valuable, even if that company had failed to see it. Slowly, opportunities grew. I took online courses, sharpened my knowledge, and connected with people who appreciated what I could do. One project led to another, and soon I wasn't just surviving, I was building something real. Something that belonged to me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel replaceable. I felt powerful. I was no longer waiting for someone to validate me or decide my future. I was creating it with my own hands. 6 months later, I found myself sitting in a cafe, working on a project for a client who valued my work deeply. My laptop was open, my coffee warm, and for the first time in a long time I felt at peace. That's when I heard a familiar voice call my name. It was my old manager. He looked surprised to see me and sat down across from me. "Gloria," he said. "How have you been?" I smiled and told him the truth. "Better than ever." He hesitated before lowering his voice. "The CEO's brother. It didn't work out. Clients left. Projects failed. The company is struggling. Honestly, they regret letting you go." I let his words sink in. A part of me wanted to feel angry, wanted to demand an apology, but instead I felt calm. For the first time, I realized I didn't need their regret. I didn't need their approval. I had already built something they could never take from me. I leaned back, took a sip of my coffee, and simply said, "It's too late. I've moved on." As I walked out of that cafe, the sun felt warmer, the world brighter. I finally understood. Sometimes life takes you out of a place you thought you belonged, not to punish you, but to push you toward where you're meant to be. I had lost my job, yes, but I found myself. And that was worth more than any promotion, any paycheck, or any title they could have given me. So if you're listening to my story and you've ever felt discarded or replaced, know this: you are not worthless. You are not replaceable. Sometimes the greatest betrayal is really the beginning of your freedom. I am Gloria. I was fired. I was forgotten. But I rose again. And now I stand stronger than ever. I walked out of that office with my box of belongings, my framed family photo, my coffee mug, and my years of memories. My coworkers stared in silence, some too scared to say goodbye. As soon as I stepped outside, the tears came rushing down. I felt humiliated, betrayed, and most of all, worthless. The nights that followed were worse. I lay awake, replaying every moment of my 15 years. All the sacrifices I made, missing birthdays, ignoring my health, always saying yes when they needed me. For what? I slipped into depression. My friends told me, "Gloria, you'll find another job." But they didn't understand. It wasn't just a job. It was my life. My identity. For weeks I avoided people. I was ashamed to say I had been fired. Ashamed that loyalty meant nothing in today's world. I kept replaying the same painful thought. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I was foolish to think hard work really mattered. Everywhere I went reminded me of the company. Passing by the office building was like being stabbed in the chest. I would see employees walking in with their coffee cups, rushing to their desks, and I'd think, that used to be me. That used to be my life. And now I was just a ghost, someone erased without hesitation. I stopped picking up calls. I ignored messages. I couldn't bear to hear the pity in people's voices. I smiled when I had to, but inside I was collapsing. I had poured so much of myself into that company that without it, I didn't even know who I was anymore. One night I sat alone at the kitchen table with my cold tea untouched, staring at my hands. My daughter walked in and asked softly, "Mom, are you okay?" I forced a smile and told her I was fine, but her eyes told me she didn't believe me. That broke me more than anything. My pain was spilling over into my family, and I hated that. Days turned into weeks, and weeks blurred into months. I was sinking deeper, and every attempt at moving forward felt impossible. Whenever I thought about applying for a new job, the voice in my head whispered, "What if they don't want you either? What if you give them everything and end up discarded again?" Then one morning something shifted. I woke up tired of my own sadness, tired of letting the same people who betrayed me control my life even after I was gone. I thought to myself, they moved on without me. Why couldn't I move on without them? That day, I forced myself to open my laptop. I didn't search for jobs, I searched for freedom, for a way to use my skills on my own terms. I found freelance websites, small businesses needing help, people looking for exactly the kind of experience I had. First, I doubted myself. But then I thought, what do I have to lose? So I started small. I helped a local business organize their operations. I designed reports, set up systems, and did what I knew best. The pay was tiny compared to what I once made, but the feeling of control, it was priceless. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. Slowly, one project led to another. Clients appreciated my work. They valued my input. They thanked me. And that was something I hadn't felt in years. The more I worked, the more I realized that my worth had never been tied to that company. My worth was within me, and no CEO, no manager, no office politics could take that away. I started investing in myself, taking online courses, learning new tools, building connections with people who actually respected me. And then something unexpected happened. One of my small projects grew bigger than I ever imagined. What started as freelance side work turned into my own business. I was no longer begging for a chance. I was creating opportunities for myself. It wasn't easy. There were late nights, financial struggles, moments of doubt. But with every step forward, I felt stronger. And I began to realize that being fired wasn't the end of my story. It was the painful push I needed to finally discover who I really was. Months later, I walked into a cafe with my laptop, preparing for a client meeting, when I saw a familiar face, my old manager. He looked shocked to see me, as though he expected to find me broken, still bitter, still stuck in the past. He sat down and asked cautiously, "Gloria, how are you?" I looked at him, smiled, and replied honestly, "Better than ever." He hesitated, then admitted the truth. The CEO's younger brother, the one who took my place, had failed miserably. Clients had left. Projects had collapsed. The company was struggling to stay afloat. And then he said the words I never expected. "They regret letting you go." For a moment, I let those words sink in. Months ago, I would have given anything to hear them. I would have clung to that regret like a lifeline. But sitting there, I realized something. His words no longer mattered. Their regret couldn't define me. Their choices couldn't control me. I leaned back in my chair, sipped my coffee, and said calmly, "It's too late. I've built something of my own now." And in that moment, I felt a freedom I had never felt before. Walking out of that cafe, I understood something I want everyone to know. Sometimes life removes you from places you think you belong, not to punish you, but to set you free. I thought losing my job was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But in truth, it was the beginning of the best chapter of my life. I am Gloria. I was betrayed. I was broken. I was replaced. But I rose again. And now I am stronger than ever. One morning, as I sat staring at the ceiling, something inside me snapped. I thought, why am I crying over people who never cared about me? Why am I giving them the power to ruin my life when they already threw me away like I was nothing? That same day, I pushed myself out of bed, walked over to my desk, and opened my laptop. My hands were shaking as I typed, because for weeks I hadn't had the courage to face reality. But this time I wasn't searching for another job, another boss to give me orders, another office that could replace me when it was convenient. No, I was searching for something different. Something that could give me back control of my own life. I didn't know where to begin, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let 15 years of experience just disappear. I had skills. I had knowledge. And even if that company didn't appreciate them, maybe someone else would. I started small, really small. I found freelance websites where people needed help with projects. A report here, an analysis there, a few hours of consulting. At first, the money was almost embarrassing compared to my old paycheck. But you know what? The freedom, that was priceless. For the first time in years, I wasn't chained to someone else's rules. I didn't have to beg for vacation days, or stay late just because the boss wanted to impress a client. I could choose my own hours. I could choose who I worked with. And even though it was scary at first, it also felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a suffocating room for too long. I realized something important in those early days. My value was never tied to a company. My worth wasn't measured by a title on my business card, or the approval of some CEO who didn't even know my children's names. My worth was mine to define. And once I understood that, something inside me shifted. Slowly, I started rebuilding my confidence. Each small project reminded me that I was capable, that my knowledge mattered. Clients thanked me for my work, something my old company hadn't done in years. I wasn't just a replaceable piece in a corporate machine anymore. I was a person again. I began taking online courses, learning new skills I'd never had time for before. I stayed up late watching tutorials, reading articles, experimenting with new ideas. And instead of feeling drained, I felt alive. For the first time in a long time, I was growing. Not for someone else's profit, but for myself. And as I grew, something beautiful happened. I started mentoring younger women who were struggling in their careers. Women who felt stuck, overlooked, or invisible just like I once did. I shared my mistakes with them, my lessons, my scars. And every time one of them said, "Gloria, you've inspired me," I felt a spark in my chest. Maybe my pain had a purpose after all. But here's the sweetest part of the story. One of my freelance projects grew so big that it turned into my own business. What started as a one-time job expanded into a long-term partnership. Then another client came along. And another. Before I knew it, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was running something of my own. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I questioned everything. Nights when bills piled up and doubt crept in. There were mornings when I stared at my computer screen and thought, what if I fail? What if I'm not enough? But then I remembered failure already happened to me. I was fired, discarded, humiliated. And yet here I was still standing, still fighting. If I could survive that, I could survive anything. My little business kept growing, and with it so did my confidence. I built a small team. I expanded my services. I started saying no to clients who didn't respect my work. Something I never dared to do in my old job. I was no longer the woman sitting quietly in the corner, waiting for recognition that never came. I was the one calling the shots. And then life played its ironic trick. The same people who once overlooked me, who treated me like I was replaceable, started reaching out. Former colleagues, even managers, began contacting me, asking for advice, requesting my help on projects. Some of them spoke with hesitation, as if they weren't sure I'd even reply. And a part of me wanted to ignore them, to give them the same silence they gave me when I walked out of that office carrying my box of memories. But I didn't, because I had changed. I wasn't bitter anymore. I wasn't desperate for their approval. I was beyond that. I responded with grace, not for them but for me, because success is the best revenge, and I had found mine. Looking back now, I see things differently. Being fired after 15 loyal years felt like the end of my life. But in truth, it was the beginning of the life I was always meant to live. If they hadn't pushed me out, I would still be trapped in that office, giving everything to people who gave me nothing in return. Losing that job was the wound that forced me to heal. And now I wake up each morning with purpose. I don't drag myself out of bed dreading another day of being undervalued. I rise with excitement, with ownership, with the knowledge that I built something on my own terms. Something that no CEO, no corporate politics, no betrayal can ever take away from me again. So when I think back to that morning when I was staring at the ceiling and wondering if I even mattered, I want to whisper to that broken version of myself. Hold on, Gloria. This pain will not last forever. One day you'll thank them for letting you go. Because the truth is, I wasn't fired. I was freed. 6 months later, I was sitting in a cafe, the soft hum of conversations blending with the smell of fresh coffee, my laptop open in front of me. I had just finished sending a proposal to a new client when the door swung open. I didn't think much of it, until I looked up and froze. A familiar face walked in. My old manager. For a split second, it felt like time had rewound. Memories of the day I was fired came rushing back. The cold conference room, his awkward silence, the way he couldn't even look me in the eye as he handed me the termination papers. But now the roles were reversed. I wasn't the one with fear in my chest. He was. His eyes widened as soon as he saw me, almost like he had seen a ghost. "Gloria," he said, his voice unsteady. "How are you?" I closed my laptop slowly, giving him a small smile. Not a bitter smile, not an angry one, just calm. Better than ever. He sat down across from me, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time, he wasn't the one in control of the conversation. I was. And then he told me something I never expected to hear. He leaned in and said, "You won't believe what's been happening since you left." I raised an eyebrow, silently encouraging him to continue. He hesitated like he was embarrassed, but finally the words tumbled out. The CEO's brother, he failed. Miserably. He didn't understand the clients, didn't understand the projects, and the team lost faith in him. One by one, clients started leaving. Projects collapsed. The company's struggling now. I just sat there listening. My heart was calm, but inside a small fire began to glow. And then he said the words that made that fire roar. "They actually regret letting you go." For a moment I was speechless. Months ago, those words would have broken me. I would have cried, maybe even begged for them to take me back. But now, for the first time since that terrible day, I didn't feel pain. I felt power. I leaned back in my chair, lifted my cup of coffee, and took a slow sip. The warmth spread through me, but so did something else: pride, strength, freedom. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Well, it's too late. I've built something of my own now." He blinked, taken aback. For once, he didn't have a response. He muttered a few polite words, wished me luck, and left the cafe looking smaller than I had ever seen him before. As I packed up my laptop and walked out into the bright sunlight, I realized something important. Being fired wasn't the end of my story. It wasn't a punishment. It wasn't even a loss. It was the beginning of a brand new chapter, one that I was writing myself. Because the truth is, if I had stayed in that company, I would have kept pouring my heart into a place that didn't value me. I would have kept waiting for recognition that would never come. I would have kept dimming my light just to fit into a box they built for me. But life had other plans. Life pushed me out of that comfort zone, ripped me away from the false security of a paycheck, and forced me to stand on my own. And at first it broke me. I cried. I doubted myself. I thought I was worthless. But looking back now, I see that every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of fear was shaping me into the woman I am today. Now I don't wait for permission. I don't beg for opportunities. I create them. I don't depend on someone else to decide my worth. I know my worth and I guard it fiercely. And the best part? The freedom. The freedom to choose my own path, to work with people who respect me, to say no when something doesn't align with my values. Walking out of that cafe, the world looked different. The streets seemed brighter, the air fresher, the future wider. Because I finally understood. Sometimes life removes you from places where you no longer belong, so you can rise higher than you ever imagined. So if you're listening to this right now, and you've ever felt betrayed, overlooked, or discarded, I want you to hear me clearly. Your story doesn't end there. That rejection you're mourning, that loss you're carrying, it might just be the universe's way of redirecting you. I know it hurts. I know it feels like the ground has been ripped out from under you. But trust me, one day you'll look back and realize it wasn't the ground collapsing. It was the floor breaking so you could step onto higher ground. Because I, Gloria, am living proof of that. I was fired. I was replaced. I was told in 1,000 subtle ways that I wasn't good enough. But today I stand taller than I ever have before. Not because they finally saw my worth, but because I finally did. And let me tell you, there's no greater feeling than that. And if my story touched you or gave you even a spark of strength, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Your support means the world, and it helps me share more stories that remind us all. No matter how many times life knocks us down, we can always rise again.